Welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here today with so many people virtually and with Skye Russell and Dasha Bao, two Harvard undergraduates, one in Florida, the other in Montana, who are joining us today to talk about an exhibit that is currently on at the CGIS Center here at Harvard University. Unfortunately, CGIS is currently closed, and making that pivot that so many institutions and programs are doing, we've decided to invite our two participants to give you a gallery tour. I'm going to quickly provide a sort of little an overview of what we are in store for today. This is the exhibit that was put together that Skye and Dasha both thought about and put together for us. That's currently on display. The exhibit is currently in the CGIS building, and it is a wonderful exhibit with dozens of photographs and quotes stemming from the projects that Dasha and Skye were involved with this past summer. It was fun to get this up and running, and this is a picture of Skye with Gary, who does a lot of the exhibit work here in the CGIS complex. Unfortunately, we couldn't actually allow people in to see the exhibit for much of spring semester due to the COVID-19 virus. And we began by first bringing the exhibit online to the Reischauer Institute's website. It's up right now if you're interested in going and taking a look. And we encourage you to do so either now or after the talk. But we also started talking with Skye and Dasha about doing a virtual event around the exhibit so that people could enjoy the pictures and learn more about the topics that both these young women were exploring in their work. Today, we have decided to bring this live to YouTube, and we're asking and allowing for people to participate in the event. Please feel free to post any questions you have throughout today's presentation. We will have both Dasha and Skye talk about parts of the exhibit, several photographs in the exhibit in the first half of today's event. Then we'll have a little conversation with them both, followed by 15 or 20 minutes towards the end to open it up to audience questions. And again, feel free to visit the website to look at the actual virtual exhibit. All right. Without further ado, we will turn things over now to Dasha. And Dasha will spend a few minutes talking about three of the pictures from the exhibit, two of her own and one from Skye's contribution. Dasha.
Hi, thank you so much, Gavin. And before I get carried away, thank you so much to Jenny and Donna and Gary for helping us put up the photos. I wasn't even there for posting the exhibit, but Skye has been an incredible partner, and I hope to collaborate in the future. So thanks for putting us together, Gavin. This has been an incredible experience all around and a new friendship. So I'm going to share my screen now. Bear with me. This is the first. Okay. All right. Are you seeing that? Great. So This is Baba Gala. And before I go any further, I just want to take a quick detour into the word Baba. Our exhibit is called Baba Babushka, and Skye can help with the pronunciation of the Japanese side of that. But Babushka is the Russian word for grandmother. And when you use the word babushka, it doesn't necessarily imply that you're talking about your own grandmother. In fact, it doesn't even presume the woman that you were talking about is a real grandmother, because at least in Volgograd, it doesn't matter. An elderly woman is a grandmother, is a grandmother, is a grandmother, is a grandmother. And if you're a little scoundrel kid in a park and you pick on someone or mess something up or are writing on a park bench, a babushka is well within her rights to give you a little knock on the head. It's this communal style of disciplining. The babushkas of Russia are not just raising their kids and their kids, they're raising the next generation. And that's very much how they operate. That said, there's lots of different types of babushkas. This is one, Galia, who I lived with in Volgograd, Russia, which is a more provincial area of Russia. It's known as being Stalingrad, and it's notorious for having been a part of the Battle of Stalingrad, the bloodiest World War II battle. So Galia, she's 86. She's lived there since she was a little girl. She lived through the World War II battle. The whole city was bombed out. She was exiled to Siberia for a while. She returned, helped to rebuild the city. They were starving for years. She's one of 6 sisters, and they're all one of these women raised me when I was in Russia. It was her sister Babasima. They're all the same height. They're very, very short, and that was one of the first hardships she came across in her life. Their growth was stunted because during their formative years, like in their teens, they didn't have the food or the nutrition that it took to grow to full height. So they're these wonderful little tiny spitfires who run around Volgograd and basically boss people around. They really run the town in a certain sense. Um, so I want to tell a quick story about Baba Galia before I speak about this precise picture, because I want you to be able to picture her in the world before we dissect what she's like in her home. Um, Volgograd is pretty rough where she lives. The outskirt that Galia lives in is run by corrupt police and gangs of young mafia guys. They drive around in small black cars blasting Russian rap. They wear t-shirts with nonsensical English phrases and gold chains. They play chicken on the highway with their cars, waiting to see who will swerve first. It's a rough city. It has a rough history, and the babushkas that I know in Volgograd steer clear of these young gangsters. Not Baba Galia. When I first got to Volgograd, Galia beat my taxi driver with her cane because he tried to rip me off the equivalent of $4. She was enraged. She then enlisted the help of a 26-year-old gang member to drive us to the most important part of Volgograd, the Stalin Museum. The way she got him to drive us around? By flirting with him. She's a total flirt. She's 86 again, and she's a total flirt. I bring this up because, again, I want you to picture what a force she is out in the world. And then I want you to look at this photograph. Most of her day is spent in this position. Sometimes she's descaling fish that another babushka brought her. Sometimes she's making bilishi, which is a traditional food. I should mention here that she is from a Tatar background. So Tatar are the Muslim minority in Russia, and they were historically discriminated against, especially during Stalin's times. But she's also an avid Stalin lover. She really, really loves Stalin. And in the context of her life, it makes perfect sense. I mean, she fought for Stalin. Her family fought for Stalin. She lost family members fighting in his name. She was she went ballistic when in the, I believe it was in the 60s, they took down, Stalingrad used to have all these, as the rest of Russia used to have these massive Stalin statues, and they took them down and replaced them with Lenin after he was denounced. And like many in Stalingrad, the city in his name, she cannot get over it to this day. So this is her with her TV. The TV is a huge part of her life. It gives her something to curse at, to cry with, to laugh at. She watches soap operas, she watches political dramas, she watches actual politics, and she watches a lot of propaganda. And during the time that I lived with her, I was part of this, and it was funny. He was very much this little TV a character in our lives. It was scary how much her life was kind of reliant on this box. But it was also kind of wonderful that she's found a way to survive years past the average life expectancy for a woman in Russia. And she attributes it to the TV. So that's her in her kitchen. This is also her kitchen slash dining room slash TV room slash living room slash extra bedroom when I'm visiting. So this next photo, oh, let's see if it works. This is the quote that came with the image. She's talking about the Ukrainian president. She's big into politics. I encourage you, when you look through the exhibit, hopefully to read the quotes. They're pretty funny. I can't even repeat it because I would rather you picture it with her intonation. This is a picture of a random guy who resembles a lot of Babugala's friends. Behind him is the massive Lenin statue. This is a funny day that I'm just going to describe quickly. She wanted to take us to the beach. It was me, and I was there filming a documentary about her, and it was me and my camera assistant, Katya. And so she takes us to the beach, which it turns out is these stairs that go into the Volga River, in front of this massive Lenin statue where the Stalin statue used to be. It's the first sunny day of the year, and the beach is absolutely spattered with all different walks of life from this region of Volgograd. And this is one of the funny guys who comes up, and he starts asking her about us. He starts asking her about me, questioning her. So let's go to the quote. This one I will read out. He asks, addressing me, "Do you need a rich man or a smart one?" And then Babugala sticks up for me. She goes, "She doesn't need anything. So you don't have men looking after you yet?" Babushka, he turns to her and goes, "Babushka, do you believe this?" And she answers very sternly, "Yes, she's independent." Again, what about when she turns 30? What was funny about this interaction is, in the context of my life, it seems sexist, a bit intrusive, not really a welcome conversation. But when I look in the context of their shared experience, they are genuinely two elderly people having a concerned conversation about my future. He cares about me in the communal way that she cares about the little boy at the park. He wants to know, am I going to be looked after as a woman? This is the world that she grew up in. She had to forge her way as a strong woman at all walks of life, but I think she's hit her peak as an 86-year-old. She totally has command of this whole region. By the way, the region is called Krasnoarmeyski Rayon, which is Red Army region. It translates to Red Army region. So, yeah, that's a little taste of life in Volgograd in the provinces of Russia. So this next photo is one of Skye's photos that I'm absolutely in love with. My understanding, and Skye, you can correct me, but it's these pickled roots in these kind of makeshift jars. And the quote is, "This root is called matatabi. It makes cats drunk. This one is good for high blood pressure." And the reason I picked this is because it reminds me of the things that I've seen in Gale's home and in other homes of elderly people in the regions that I've been in. They have these random jars of things that, like, you can't even imagine what the use for that would be. But each one, and I used to think of it as clutter, right? But it's absolutely not. Every one of them has a story, and this one's just wonderful because I can't imagine what kind of life experience must have led to discovering a root pickled that makes cats drunk. Like, I can't even imagine a drunk cat. And yet this is part of this older man's life experience, which is It's so wonderful. And the last thing I want to say as I wrap up is that it was really interesting returning to these photographs in the context of self-isolation. A lot of the subjects of my work and of Skye's work are elderly people. They've outlived their partners, they've outlived their friends, they've been living in isolation for a while. Um, and they do it with what I now realize only in the past months is an incredible amount of grace and resilience and creativity. Um, a few months ago, I treated this exhibit as art and as ethnography and as a peek into another world, a peek into another generation. But now I treat these photographs, and I'm genuinely saying this. I returned to this exhibit when we were putting it online, and when I came back to it, I really started treating it as a manual for myself on solitude, on self-sufficiency. Um, I'm sure a lot of you have discovered for yourself. It's incredible how much creativity it takes to be alone and to be enough for yourself. Um, so I encourage you to look at the details in these photographs and maybe take a hint or two from our babushki. So that wraps up my little spiel, Skye. I'll pass it on to you if I can figure out how to stop screen sharing. Ah,
You
sorry.
did it, but yeah, it's gone now. Thank you, Dasha. That was so wonderful and hard to follow behind. But I will try my best. I'm going to share my screen as well. I'm hoping that is on your screen too. Since Dasha gave that lovely introduction to our exhibition title, I can talk about my half of the title, which is the word Baba. I know Dasha was dealing with one specific babushka in her project. And I was doing a similar project at the time that Dasha was filming her documentary in Russia. But I was working in a small village called Tendyu in a prefecture called Nagano in Japan. Nagano is known for being a great center of nature. It has these grand mountains. It's home to the Japanese Alps. As you can see in the photos, it's just this beautiful, beautiful place. But I was taking photos of sort of the elderly people who I met there. And when I say the elderly people I met there, those were basically the only people I met there, because this village is notoriously aging. A great majority of the population is over 65, maybe even 70. But I was meeting all of these people in their 60s to 90s who were living these really vibrant lives up in the mountains in the Japanese Alps. So the word Baba comes from the Japanese word for grandmother, which you can say oba-san, you can say oba-chan. And if you're a small child, or if you're really maybe close to the old woman, you might say the word Baba. So it's a very personal word, I would say. And I noticed Dasha used, she said Baba Galia as well, which I thought was really interesting. But yeah, we called it Baba Babushka, sort of a play on words. But Baba would only refer to the grandmothers, the old woman, and I picked my photo to shed some light on the grandfathers as well, because they were a part of my project. The word for grandfather would be oji-san or oji-chan or jiji in the sort of equivalent way to Baba, the sort of very personal, kind of childlike manner of saying it. But yeah, this photo that I'm showing on the screen now is an old grandfather. His name is Kurami-san. He is in his 80s. He lives alone with his dog in a small house up in the mountains. The village that it's in itself is very isolated. It's about 2 hours by train from maybe the nearest big city. But his house is even isolated within that village. It's about an hour, maybe 30-minute car ride from the center of the village. So he's really up there alone with his little dog. But this is on his property when someone in the village took me to visit him, and he gave me a little property tour of sorts where he showed me his home, he showed me his mushrooms, he showed me the trees he planted, he showed me his beehive, all of these things. This is just a shot from this little nature walk we took together. And the accompanying quote that you'll see in the exhibition is this. I'll let you read it to yourself, but it was interesting to talk to this man, and everybody in the village would say something really similar to this, but when you go to visit people, something that inevitably comes up is you looking at their home, looking at the view from their window and telling them, oh, you must think this is such a beautiful place. It's so gorgeous here, and the air is clean, the sky is clear, the water is clear, it's a beautiful place. And what everybody says is, no, it's not beautiful. You know, what are you talking about? I'm just I'm just a rural grandma or a rural grandpa, and there's no beauty about any of this. And there's something funny about that, and something beautiful about that, I suppose, in a sort of paradoxical way. But this shot, I thought, just kind of captures that of this man, Kurami-san, being in his absolute day-to-day life. He's not thinking twice about anything he's doing. In this photo, he's got his working clothes on. He used to be a professional charcoal maker, which he still does. He still makes charcoal from the trees on his property, but he's got his working gear on and all blue, holding his walking stick that he's picked off the ground. And it's beautiful just looking at this man in the space that he calls home. But to him, it's just his mountain. And that really, I thought that says a lot about this place and the people there. I also picked this one from the same man in the same place. I wanted to bring attention to this photo because I think it gets overlooked. There's not too much going on, seemingly. But I think just sort of staring at this photo tells you a lot about this man, how he lives, where he lives. There's his dog. The dog is a Jack Russell Terrier named Ku, which is an orange juice brand in Japan, which is quite cute. He walks around in the wilderness with these house slippers on, these sort of foot massage slippers, which is very funny to me. They're absolutely dilapidated slippers. He's got his pants, his big blue pants, and he spends a lot of his time either sitting in his house looking out at the mountain or doing his work out in nature in the woods. And he's got his slippers to do that. It's a shot that really just talks about, it tells you a lot about him. And he's a real eccentric guy. And I could talk for days about this charcoal maker. I think he's just great. And then to talk about, I also picked one of Dasha's pictures. Let's see. And this, I think, is, I mean, I love all of Dasha's shots. They're just great. But this one, I think, is especially funny. You see the photo and you already know there's something going on here. There's some tension that's here, but the quote just brings it home for me, I think. She says, "Thank you for the fish, but you cannot come in. Goodbye now." It's just, it says so much. And I love looking at this photo. I love reading the quote next to the photo. It makes you wonder, what did this woman do to get locked out of the house? why did she try to bring the peace offering that is a fish? And if you look at the exhibition, it's paired by photos of Galia scaling the fish. You know, she's received this fish from a woman she doesn't really like, but you know, it's food. She has to scale it. She's going to eat it, no matter what. I think it speaks a lot to how funny, how funny some of these domestic scenes are that Dasha saw. And I share a lot of that feeling, I think, with the experience I had in the village in Japan, where you sit in on these people's lives and these lives that these people take absolutely for granted. They're not, you know, thinking about their lives as beautiful or funny or anything other than mundane, but there's these moments that's so beautifully captured in this photo that Dasha took, these moments that are so rich with narrative and rich with this hilarity of the daily life that you see in Volgograd, Russia. Um, and the whole series of photos that Dasha's brought to the table with this exhibition just have such a strong sense of narrative that I really inspire, and I'm excited to hear more about if our talk comes around to that later. But I think that's all I have for my half of the presentation. We might have ended a bit earlier on that, but I think you're muted, Gavin.
Pardon me. I don't think I'm half as experienced with Zoom as you probably both are. Joe, thank you very much. These are wonderful photographs, and the exhibit itself is just put together in such a fun way. I was wondering if maybe a place to start a little bit of a conversation, and before I do so, I just want to encourage members of the audience to feel free to submit some questions for our speakers. We'll be getting to those a little bit later in the discussion. But one of the things that struck me being particularly interesting is that you've really captured the intimate and interior lives of these people. But that's not such an easy thing to do. I mean, often the stereotype of a rural place or people who may be more private and living on their own is that they don't want to have visitors around. Yet both of you were embedded with these in these communities and actually living, if not with some of the people that you are actually doing research on, then right next door to them. And I was wondering if you talk a little bit about that experience, part of this cultural experience in the summer that you both had.
Yeah, well, I was also surprised by the villagers' openness to sort of have this foreigner in their house with this big camera. Sometimes I had a big microphone on the camera that probably made it pretty scary looking. But people were surprisingly really willing to speak about their experience, to show me around, to give me vegetables a lot of the time. That happened nearly every day. But I think something that helped a lot was that I had a contact point in the village sort of local office. There was a young woman who's also into photography, and she would take me around to different spots in the village every day, and we would just walk around until somebody found us. So, until an old woman, maybe she was tending to her garden, she would kind of call us over and ask if we wanted some vegetables, and I would ask if I could take photos, and she would say yes, as long as I get to wear my hat or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I was astonished at how open people were, but I guess maybe to some extent it's a stereotype that people in rural areas, older people especially in rural areas, are very reserved and closed off. I think once you're there, once you express interest, like sincere interest, at least in my experience, there was never a very heavy barrier between me and the people I was meeting. They all seemed, genuinely excited to share with somebody who wanted to know more. But I know Dasha had a little bit of a
Yeah.
different.
It was a little different for me.
You
I've
might
been
want to talk about the larger project too, because it wasn't just photographs that you were.
right. That probably didn't didn't help my case in terms of access. But so I had been to Volgograd a few times when I was younger, and then I came a couple years ago, just for a few days to stay with Babushka, kind of observe her life, be a part of it. And that's when Russian-US relations were tense, but not headed back into Cold War relations tense. They were just kind of relatively tense. And so the people I was received with as an American, when I acknowledged that I was American, or if I admitted that I was American, which felt like the honest thing to do, I was received pretty much with excitement, and wonder. And I mean, everyone I introduced myself to was just kind of in awe of meeting a real American, and they wanted to. I felt this weird pressure that I was representing all of the U.S. Which is kind of absurd because I'm just a nerd with a camera. So that was my first, but largely people were excited, and I was almost a celebrity in a sense. I experienced some animosity because, again, it's Volgograd is a military town, and it continues to be defined by that. And so there are a lot of veterans. There are a lot of Cold War veterans, in the sense that they still are kind of operating under that mentality. So I was always met with some amount of distrust. And then the last year that I came, this past year, 1 year ago exactly, actually, I brought a lot of film equipment and a lot of audio equipment, and that scared people. But not Babushka. She was so excited to have me be part of her life. She would pose for anything. She would do anything. She cooked for me night and day. She'd get up at 5 a.m. to cook me some meal before I even woke up, and then she'd go to bed at 11 or later. She wanted we did cognac shots every night. She had to bust out the favorite bottles that she'd been saving for years. Like, it was really a celebration, and it was a month of celebation. So I know that
No drunk cats. There's
yeah, no drunk cats, just old babushki. So she was so excited. But when she took me to go meet her, because part of my project idea was that I was going to film her community of women. So she has these little women that live in also tiny little apartments, and they sell their goods on the street. So they all have their own gardens, and their pension is not enough to survive on. So the way that they survive is they sell like cucumbers and berries that they've picked. And she's funny. She'll go and buy food from them, and then she'll turn it into a dish and then bring it back to them and feed them with it. But she like haggles over prices with them. It's a whole sport. And I was really excited to film this. So I came down with my camera, and I had met them all before, and we were close. They had allowed me to take pictures of them the year before. They knew I was American and kind of sus, but not too much. And this year, because of the way that tensions had changed, and because of a lot of kind of state propaganda that they'd heard on TV, they refused to be filmed, all of them. So that was tough. I felt like they were very conflicted. They wanted their story to be told, but they still regarded me as a spy of sorts. I think they were worried that I would film them. I think they were more worried that people would see them being filmed, and assume that something was wrong. Because the other thing is, a lot of people thought I was a Russian reporter, a Russian news reporter. So tragically, I had a lot of people come up to me and say, "Thank God you're here. We're so happy. We've been calling the TV station. We've been calling the government offices. We just need someone to come fix our roads." Or like, I'd have people come up to me and tell me, my family was just kicked out of their apartment. My aunt or something was just kicked out of her apartment. Can you film me talking about this, and we'll get some exposure? and I felt horrible because I'm not in a position to lend them any sort of agency in that way. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag. I'm excited to go back when things open up and see how they've weathered through all this. But the people, once you warm up to them, they will always take you in. Like even when they regard me as a foreigner or as an American or as someone who is spy adjacent, they treat me with a lot of dignity and respect, and they'll always feed me.
In that sense, I mean, both of you have had cultural experiences in the respective societies that you were photographing and involved with. Did these experiences that you've had, particularly in the development of these projects, did they change your perceptions of Japan or Russia? Was there anything that I don't know, sort of preconceived notions or stereotypes that you came with that you had to sort of suddenly say, wait a second, this is not how it is. And being on the ground and embedded in this particular way, change how you look at things. Skye, you could start us off.
Well, so I am Japanese, but I am from, well, yeah, my grandmother, who I visit often, she lives in a much more urban part of Japan, which describes the experience of many Japanese elderly people, but I hadn't gotten to see the experience of extremely rural Japan. So it's sort of the polar opposite of what I was familiar with, this sort of village lifestyle. But I mean, I think compared to what I had experienced in urban settings, and I think this is probably not particular to a Japanese urban experience, but urban experiences in general, but there's a sort of sense of isolation and individualism that you get thinking about an elderly person living alone, say in a city, which is sort of the case with my grandmother. She lives alone in a big city. She does almost everything for herself. But then when I went to this village setting, you have, I mean, it's isolated. So kind of isolation is the first word that comes to mind because it's an inaccessible place, but the experiences of the individual people living there is so far from isolation. There's so much of a tight-knit network of people there, of trading vegetables, of helping each other out in each other's gardens, doing work on each other's houses, going over to borrow like a kitchen utensil that you need when you're making dinner, which is something I did at some point during my stay. But just this interdependence of people that I hadn't quite seen before to such a degree that I saw in this village was really new and different and wonderful for me to see, I think, and to be embedded in, to actually have, people giving me vegetables to cook those vegetables, I guess like Galia does, but to cook those vegetables and bring it back to their house, exchanging utensils, things like that, was a different experience for me, and I'm really, really glad I had it.
How about for you, Dasha? Were there any ideas challenged in this experience, or?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say I think my prejudice that I came in with was not so much political or cultural. It was because ultimately that's why I wanted to tell Gaila's story. I felt like I had been given the gift of kind of access to that story, which is truly such a gift to see someone's life so intimately, someone that you're not related to. And so I felt like that was something that I wanted to share, had some sort of like obligation to share. But I definitely came in with a generational prejudice, about her, what I suspected would be her activity level and her opinions and the things that she cares about, the things that she's interested in. Some of it was confirmed, like she absolutely does love her soap operas. But then I loved the soap operas too. I am every bit as susceptible to the pleasures of an older Russian babushka. Um, and interestingly, I knew she was spunky, but she's much spunkier than me or honestly anyone I know. She taught me, I think I've told Skye this before, but she taught me to help me fit in, to help me act more Russian, seem more Russian, initially as a safety thing, so that I wouldn't be picked out as American. She taught me all of these. They call it in Russian "подеревенский," which is like village talk or kind of more vulgar talk. So not only did she not want me to be identified as American in relation to her, like she has a whole reputation to uphold. She also didn't want me to be recognized as a city girl because that is the only way that I could be more loathed than if I was an American. So she was like set on turning me into a true Volgograd girl, and she taught me a lot of dirty jokes, like actual. I will not repeat them because I want this to be able to stay as like a nice clean record. But she taught me some of the most vulgar things I've ever heard, and they are hilarious. They're hilarious, and and she tells these jokes, and she has a wonderful laugh. So she'll say a joke, and then she'll go, she like leans back. It's a whole experience. So I think I underestimated, I guess, just like the fire and the spunk and the pleasure of living with her. She's the best roommate. I have wonderful roommates who I love, but yeah, she's the best. So
we're starting to get into some of our comments from our viewers today, and someone had just mentioned that aging is an extreme sport in some cultures, and I certainly feel that ourselves. But I think there's a moment here, right, with COVID-19 and looking at our older communities and members and how they're treated and the challenges that are faced. And was wondering if maybe you would want to reflect a little bit on how your own deeper understanding of how elderly are treated may have changed through these experiences, and also maybe add on to that if you've been in touch with the people that you were in contact with in the process of these projects.
Yeah, I mean, I have phone numbers of the elderly people I have photographed. I have certain phone numbers, but I'm hesitant to call out of the blue, but I am in contact with sort of village office people and certain friends who know the older people. So I have sort of a grapevine of contact to the people. But at least from what I've heard in this current moment, the village's Tindu itself is not too affected by COVID thanks to its isolation, I think, because there's nobody going into the village or out of the village. So I think there is a bit of a sense of being a little on edge because, you know, if it is introduced to the village, then we don't know what'll happen. But at least for now, things have been safe for everyone there, which is really good to hear. But in terms of thinking about elderly people and their sort of place in society, that's something that I think I reflected on a lot during my time in Tindu last summer, because I think we have this notion of elderly people as, I don't know, especially in rural areas, maybe being sort of detached from what's happening on a larger scale, maybe on a national or on a world scale. But that really wasn't the case at all. At any home that I went to, the grandmas and grandpas were talking to me about politics, about international politics. They were worried about me because, you know, I'm from this country, from America. They would ask, you know, what's going on in America? Like, can you tell me more about that? But they were really in touch, even without I don't know, without being on social media or anything. It's not like they watch TV all the time either, but they read the news, they like to listen to the radio, so they know a lot of things, and they are concerned about things that young people in the city are concerned about, which I guess should go without saying, but it might. I think it's sort of a latent bias that I had going in, if we're kind of going back to the last question. But yeah, and one thing that I remember from talking with a lot of the people in the village was that they didn't feel like their views as rural elder people were being heard or valued at a national level. They felt sort of overlooked. And I think going in as a young person from abroad, I felt sort of guilty of that overlooking. And it kind of made me think twice and think harder about their views. And I think living there and living among the people and being able to talk with them and help them out with things sort of, got me to think about that a little more, the importance of those opinions that might be sort of minority opinions at a national level. But yeah, I guess how was Russia or Volgograd in particular, I suppose.
Yeah, I'm worried about I'm worried about honestly all of the older people in Russia. They've done a good job in the main cities of keeping old people at home, incentivizing them to stay home. There's even kind of cash benefits to staying home, and they have a pretty good camera system in place, surveillance camera system in place, so they know if you leave. And so yeah, I guess I'm proud of the Russian government for incentivizing the older generations to stay home. I'm worried about the regions because they are understaffed and they don't have enough equipment and there's a lot of misinformation. But ultimately, I'm not that worried about Babushka. I can't call her because she has a landline, and whenever I try to call her, she yells at me for racking up the money on the landline. So no matter what tragedy happens, no matter what important thing I need to tell her, she really screams at me for it. And it's funny, she has phone conversations all day with her friends and her daughter and different people in Russia. But she keeps meticulous notes about her phone conversations, how long and how many rubles they're charging the other person. The government tried to scam her on her taxes the other year. And she caught them, and she did all this telling and all this math, and she's really bright, and she caught them, and not only did she get her money back, but they actually had to pay her off to like not talk about it. So she made a whole deal out of it. I don't worry about her. She's lived through so much. She survived so much. She's already so self-sufficient. She cooks for herself. She does everything on her own. I think she is as likely to survive now and to keep surviving as she has been through every other massive event that she's lived through. In terms of the place of elderly people in specifically in Russian society, that's something I think about a lot. It's really interesting because they grew up in the Soviet Union. They fought for it. They worked in it. She was a big leader, amongst her comrades, amongst her communist comrades. She worked at a naval shipbuilding factory and was kind of a head administrator in that position. And it's hard for that generation to speak the same language politically and culturally as the younger generations that were born into democracy. They have a lot of trust in the state regime. They have a lot of trust and admiration for Putin. And it makes it hard for younger generations who are looking for reform, who are looking for change, to have real conversations with the people that they come from. And there's also, recently it was the May war holidays, and the one thing is, it was very, very sad for me to see, of course they didn't have a parade, luckily, because it was the safe thing to do, but the war parade in Russia is the biggest event for veterans, and they've had it since World War II, since 45 probably, and they didn't have it this year, and it's sad to think that that is something that will maybe trickle off as veterans pass away. It's just such a huge part of Russian culture and Russian history, and kind of familial history and pride. So yeah, I worry more about the loss of pride, and the loss of hope, and the loss of respect or communication with the older generation than I do about their actual well-being, because they're survivors.
I was wondering, we've been getting a lot of comments and questions on the chat through YouTube. I was wondering if maybe we could go back to a question that came up a little bit earlier, which is actually about the process of making photographs or film, and how that influenced your relationship with your informants, with the people that you're involved with. And just kind of adding on to that a little bit, it seems, especially in the communities where you are based, an exchange relationship is so important. Everything is based on sort of a give and a take. And even if you don't want the fish, you still accept it, although you may not want the person who's giving it in your house. So I was wondering if you talk a little bit about making photographs, and that is part of this cultural encounter.
Yeah. Photographing, it was hard to be the sole person on the project. I mean, I was working on this alone. I mean, except for the village office woman who I had to escort me around and help me have conversations. I had to be having conversations with the people and asking them questions, as well as taking photos at the same time, which was sort of a strange thing to subject a person to, I think, to have a camera in their face and to try to be having a conversation. But I mean, it worked out okay, but it was kind of fun, I think, for the other person too. Everybody, you bring a camera and there's something to talk about. There's something new to talk about, I think, because these people don't normally have a person with a camera coming to their door. So, they're kind of embarrassed. They say, oh, you can take a photo, but don't show this person or this person or this person the photo. And they'll be shy, and they'll let you take the picture and you'll show it to them. And there's this whole exchange around creating the photographs that I thought was kind of fun and unique. And at the end of my stay in the village, I printed out the photographs, and I went around giving them to the various people that I photographed. And they liked that. I had people, put them in little plastic sleeves and put them on their shelf. And then of course they'd tell me another story about all the other photos that are on their shelf. And there was a unique type of connecting with people that came with doing the photography project. That was really lovely, I think, and something that I wouldn't have had otherwise. Dasha, what did you think?
Yeah. No, I agree. The process is so interesting. With Babushka, it was funny because my photos are actually screenshots from a film, and it was funny because filming her, she just forgot the camera existed. It became like the TV in her room. It became one of us, and she would occasionally address it, but not really. And if she addressed it like an extension of me, so future me. So a lot of times, I think she forgot about it often, but a lot of times she would remember that it was on. And sometimes I just keep it rolling in the corner while we would sit and chat, just cuz. And sometimes she would randomly remember that it was there. She'd be looking away talking in a conversation, and then she would turn to it and give me instructions for my future self. Where I would remind her, sometimes, like, I sat her down. I tried to keep it usually casual, but I sat her down for an interview a few times, and I had her get all set up and everything. And it was so interesting seeing how differently she reacted when she realized she was being filmed. So all of a sudden her speech became very stilted. She chose her words very carefully. And I love those clips because they say something about how she wants to be seen, how she wants to present herself. And I had kind of a ethical dilemma over that a few times, where I would pick out great pieces of her, like in her natural habitat or behaving the way she normally does. And then I'd kind of run them alongside her performing herself and her persona. And I just wonder, like, what should I be showing? Does it matter that I'm showing my vision of her rather than what she believes that I'm showing? Which is definitely a much more composed, straight, you know. And the other thing that was funny, occasionally I did take photos of her, just like still photographs. And so I would tell her that we're taking a photograph, and she would get super still. She understands how TV works. She watches it all the time. She understands how film works, obviously. But she has this habit from when she was young, I suppose, of getting very still because she doesn't want to ruin the photograph. And she would sit there. I'd be like, okay, I got it, like on my phone or whatever, like, it just takes a second. And she's still sitting there super, super, like, unmoving. And it was really beautiful, because it took me back to like what image making was like in her youth, and how rare it was to have an image of yourself. She has, very few images of herself as a young woman, and she treasures them. And then to have all of a sudden this massive amount of information about her, I just think she didn't fully even comprehend how much film of her now exists in the world. And it's a hard thing to communicate to someone who the rest of their life, 80% of their life is composed of just these tiny little images every few years. And then all of a sudden there's this huge library. So it was interesting. It was really interesting.
We're getting down to the last few minutes here, but I was just struck by what you were saying, Dasha, and thinking, Skye, of your project almost started not so much as people, but houses, and the houses where people were living, and sort of this portraiture of houses that then became the portraiture of people. That sort of evolution of a project is quite interesting in of itself. And I was wondering when that happened in your project, when it shifted over to being something very different than what you had intended.
Yeah, well, there was a whole sort of timeline of how this project evolved. At first, it was just taking at the very, very beginning, the project was simply to take photos. So the village office person took me to like a waterfall. She took me to the river. We spent about half a day taking photos of just nature things. And then at some point we just looked at each other and she said, let's take photos of people. Like, this isn't very exciting. I think we want to take pictures of people. So we started to visit people. And initially I thought, these homes are really interesting. These homes are so old. A lot of these homes, people have been living there for family generations, dozens of generations. So I wanted to take pictures of them, but I think there was a slow realization that I couldn't communicate what was so wonderful about the home without communicating who lived there, and how interrelated those two things were. So for this exhibition, I focused a lot on the people themselves, but yeah, the project in general also had this dimension of photographing the home and capturing the relationship between the inhabitant and their domestic environment. But yeah, they're kind of one and the same in this location. And I felt that with Dasha's series too, seeing the pictures of your Babushka in her home and her city. There was just this sense of oneness between her and everything that was around her. And I thought that was really beautiful, and also sort of a connection point between our projects.
This has been wonderful. This has been exciting. I want to sort of bring things to close. I'm sorry, it's the hour has passed, and this has been great. And actually, I don't want to necessarily thank COVID-19 for anything at this point, but for allowing us to do something that we never thought we'd be able to do, and bringing together so many people to share in these photographs. I will definitely encourage everyone to go to the website. It's on the YouTube channel, and take a look. There's a virtual exhibit as well as the photographs and the text themselves. I want to say a quick word of thanks to members of the Davis Center and the Reischauer Institute who are in the background making all of this happen. It couldn't have happened without all of you, so thank you so much. And finally, thank you to Dasha and to Skye for letting us pull this off at the tail end of the semester. And a special congratulations to Skye because you're graduating.
Thank you.
And congratulations there. And we wish you the very best. And of course, I think everyone here hopes to see you continue with your image making and your projects. And we look forward to seeing a lot more. So thank you so much for sharing with us. And thank you for everyone for joining today's webcast.
Yeah, thank you so much to Gavin and everyone at Reischauer and the Davis Center. This is great.